of Belizean workers' rights. Yes, it's episode 5, season 1 of Belizean workers' rights. Our story is about unionism in Belize by myself, Sista YaYa, Marin Coleman, community worker and grassroots journalist, and co-hosted by our brother Dean Flowers, who is currently the president of the Public Service Union. Good night, brother Dean.
Good night, Sister YaYa. Thanks for having me once again. Good night, Belize, and good night to our gracious host, Sister Tricia.
That's right. Good night, Sister Trisha Paris, who is here every Thursday night when we're here. She's our technical person. We appreciate the time she is donating to us. And so tonight it's the three of us. We're hoping that others will join us, and then we'll have a rich conversation. So we're asking people when they're in the space to keep your mic off if you're not speaking. Please put your camera on when you do speak. And tonight I told Brother Dean, whenever I touched base before we had today's show, it's the night when we have conversations for the first half hour about Belizean Union business, and then in the last half hour, the participants are open to talk. So I was saying to Brother Dean, I wanted to talk tonight about a women's union that Belize had. And I don't know the story, so I'll have to read. But I'm letting you know the source of the information. This is the source of the information. And that would be Spear Reports 8, Independence 10 years after, 5th Annual Studies and Belize Conference by Spear. And for those who may not know, SPEAR is the Society for the Promotion of Education and Research. At the time, it was a Belize nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating national consciousness and achieving social and economic justice for the poor, the powerless majorities through research, popular education, organization, community development, and social action. We sure miss SPEAR. Were you familiar with SPEAR, Brother Dean?
Yes, Society for the Promotion of Education and Research, I think it is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the last I heard of Spear was when they did a, a survey before an elections. I think that year that we had about 3 or 4 surveys on who may win the elections, and I think Spear was one of
Not if
them.
any of them are accurate.
I don't quite recall.
I'm reading from tonight's reading is from the section is called Sewing the Threads of Dependency, Women in the Garment Industry 10 Years After Independence. And the author is Adele Katsim.
Oh, Adele.
On page 109, Belize, the Women Workers Union. On Monday, April 8, 1991, over 60 women from the newly formed Women Workers Union staged a peaceful strike and picketed government offices to protest the firings of 16 of their women workers. These women all worked at the Civic Textile Company Limited and alleged that the April 6th firings took place because of the women's affiliation with the union, the first women's union in Belize. Among those terminated were 6 executive officers and some of them most active union members. Sound familiar, Brother Dean? It made me think of the 36 Port of Belize Limited employees who were also members of the Christian Workers Union. And oftentimes, to my recollection, when people are terminated, they go for the union leaders and the very vocal union members. Is that right, Brother Dean? Good. So let me continue with my reading. The WWU drew national attention to problems experienced in the garment industry, exposing government policies for development to be contrary to people-oriented development. The female workers had to be protected from abuse. It was for this reason that the protest began. It is not unreasonable to request that foreign companies, irrespective of their intentions to invest in a big way, observe our labor laws and show this in their treatment of our people. WWU Press Release Number 4, 4th April 1991. For the first time in our history, Belizean grassroots women challenged our government to re-examine their foreign and national policies, realizing that the problems of low wages and poor working conditions for women have national, regional, and international implications. Registered on March 20, 1991, the Women Workers Union, WWU, was born out of a plea for higher wages and piece rates. Upon realizing that their weekly allowances of $28 could not stretch to meet weekly expenses, the women went on a one-day strike demanding piece rates. On that same day, March 9, piece rates were placed on the walls. The success of this initial organized action led the women to form themselves into a union. But shortly after the union publicized the names of its executive body, 16 women received termination letters. Members of the union pressured government to place demands on the company to rehire all fired workers within a week without conditions attached. When the company refused to concede to the demands, government took a decision, appointed a board of inquiry to investigate the events leading to the terminations and to make recommendations to resolve the matter. Representatives from the union, the company, and the government sat on the board, and two lawyers, one each representing the union and management, fought the case from April 24 to May 3rd. It was at this forum that the conditions of work were uncovered. Now, what followed next are what they call working conditions. And they were very detailed in listing the working conditions, and then they listed the breaches of law. So let me just give you an idea of the working conditions that these women were going through. Wash basins. The 120 women workers employed at Civic Textiles found it impossible to share 4 wash basins within a time limit of half hour during lunch break. Some proceeded to work without washing their hands, soiling the garments, and were accused of producing low quality work. Toilets. Only 6 toilets were available for 120 women. The breaks of 10 minutes twice daily were inadequate for everyone to use the facilities. This led to waiting in lines or not using the toilet at all. On most days, women provided their own toilet paper. Seating. Stools were used as seats at the factory. Chairs with backrests were recommended to alleviate the risk of back injury or backache on the job. These stools were uncomfortable for working a 9-hour-a-day schedule. The cafeteria. Civic Textiles had recently built a shed with long tables and benches to serve as an eating area for the workers. Mobile vendors sold food outside the gates of the factory. Security measures. At 7:30 a.m. on working days, the gates of the factory were padlocked. Only the compound's management personnel had access to keys opening the gates. In case of emergency, no alternative exit existed, increasing the risk of panic and disaster on the compound. The women felt that working under such highly scrutinized measures was akin to working in a prison. In addition, women's purses were taken away from them at the beginning of the working day and placed in a cage so that access to personal belongings was limited. 2 more concerns. Work schedule. Women reported to work from 7:30 a.m. to midday and from 12:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. with 2 10-minute breaks daily. The women worked alternative Saturdays and skipped alternative Fridays, totaling 90 hours every 2 weeks. Wages were calculated on this 90-hour period rather than weekly. Wages. The flat rate for sewing machine operators is 63 US cents per hour, the cost of a tin of condensed milk in Belize. Piece rates were 6 cents US for hemming a dozen pockets and 15 cents US per dozen for sewing down the labels. Although these wages are below the basic cost of living in Belize, the company did not break any wage law by paying low wages because Belize had no general minimum wage legislation to protect workers. Today we hear that labor law reforms are being passed to the House of Representatives. Transcript of the Board of Inquiry hearings, Labor Department, May 1991. And then he went on to talk about, and this one is short, and then we'll talk about it, the breaches of law. Overtime, the women were not paid overtime on the extra 9 hours. They worked every other week. These are the breaches of the company. Breaks, the women receive a half-hour lunch break daily. Each day, these women work for 9 hours. According to the laws of Belize, workers are to receive a minimum of 1 hour lunch break for every 6 hours of work per day. Immigration, Civic Textiles hired immigrants from Central America not in possession of valid work permits to work at the factory while the striking workers took to the streets of Belmopan. Rules and regulations. Contrary to the factory's law in Belize, the women were not made aware of the factory's rules and regulations at the time of employment. This information was placed on their bulletin board a month and a half after the factory opened. Termination. Civic Textiles violated the constitutional rights of Belizean workers by firing 16 women workers solely on the grounds of their union affiliation. And this came from the transcripts of the Board of Inquiry hearings, Labor Department, May 1991. I read for about 10 minutes, Dean. Lot of things left to talk about. Respect. If we could find, I have to look for those women. I have to ask people if they know these women so we could have them as our guest. Your mic is not on. Your mic is not on.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so that's my first question. YaYa, when you mentioned about finding these women, my first question would be names. No names are called.
We have elder unionists who have joined this conversation, and I've gotten names of other elder unionists. Belize is small. We will find these sisters and we will find their family members, but the call is going out. The sisters who were members of Belize's only women's union, we need to talk with you.
Yeah, so in terms of the literature that you have with you, their names weren't mentioned in there.
No, their names were not mentioned.
Wow, well, I think that's unfortunate. Discredit. I mean, it's an injustice to their legacy. You know, I mean, we should see their name plastered all over the place, like with the same Martha and Price and
Breda Dean, the truth is, and it's not just in Belize, that historically women are not given the credit, and we are usually the backbone when it comes to movement work and organizing. And oftentimes the sisters don't insist that they're given the credit for the work that they've done. I do understand that patriarchy is real, and that's the domination of male power over female power, and the rationale that you are born inherently more intelligent and in leadership role, and it's true. So even now when you have conversations about women in leadership in Belize, for example, and one of my elders have said this publicly and I agree with her. She said that most women in leadership in Belize would only be, because usually it's the men in leadership who would allow you to, they look for women who are manageable. Because if you're not a manageable woman, you can't get leadership because you will buck the system, and that's not what they're here for. But then most sisters who are independent, confident thinkers would not put themselves in such positions because we're not here to be managed. And so those are some of the hard conversations we need to have when we have women in leadership, because I wouldn't I wouldn't support someone in leadership solely based on gender. Now, we ought to have adequate representation based on our population when it comes to genders and ethnicity. It also goes with merit. So I would often say, and you look at the brothers in leadership, you look at how they speak to each other, how they speak to women, and you know what they say, whatever you do in your home, you do outside. Yeah. So if in your home you're not a respectful person, then it doesn't matter where you go. That's how you're going to show up. So how can you expect a sister to be given a leadership position or a brother to be given a leadership position and they're not leading in their own household? I mean, they may have the title that they lead, but they don't know how to lead. Yeah. And that's problematic in leadership.
You're certainly right, YaYa, and I think we see that manifesting itself, in the kind of leadership that we experience on a daily basis with our public figures. I think it really speaks loudly on the fact that, and I think people don't understand. You said that, what you said just now in terms of our leadership in public space is a reflection of our leadership in private space. And I think that's a very serious statement. And I think that people need to reflect on that when we think about, or when we're choosing our leaders, especially in the political climate that we live in, or the landscape, the political landscape, where it's a male-dominated landscape. I think we have to seriously start looking within our communities and see the kind of leaders these individuals are before we put them on the national level. But a couple things from your excerpt, YaYa. Just correct me here. You spoke of a 90-hour work week. Is that correct?
Let me go back. It says wages were calculated on this 90-hour period rather than weekly. We're talking about the work schedule. Women reported to work from 7:30 a.m. to midday and from 12:30 p.m. to 5 o'clock with 2 10-minute break.
Yeah. Okay, and then they alternate on Saturday.
Yeah, so I don't know how many hours that is. Totaling 90 hours every 2 weeks.
Okay, it was 90 every 2 weeks.
90 hours every 2 weeks, so it's 45 hours a week.
Yeah, 45. So pretty much nothing has really changed, yeah. Nothing has really changed because our shift workers and our manual laborers are still forced to do 45 hours a week as we speak today.
I am looking for this information. I think it's here. Okay, this is from this book, right? I don't agree with a lot in this book, but it's the best we have right now. It's called A History of Slavery and Emancipation in Belize. And on the last page, just to let you know about that 45-hour work week, I'll just read a paragraph. A special magistrate was appointed to each colony to oversee relations and enforce that the slaves were working a required 45 hours per week. The end of their apprenticeship period came early since it was found that abuse and ill treatment of enslaved people had gotten worse. Now, in 1833, the Act for the Abolition of Slavery was passed, and they passed it saying that there was an internship period from 1834 to 1838. No, I'm sorry, it should have been for a period of, to take effect August 1st, and it was to serve a period of unpaid apprenticeship. I forgot how long the period of apprenticeship was. Anyways, it ended early, as I just read, because of mistreatment. But did you get that? Let me read that again. And that's what I'm saying to people, that we need to do our own research to understand. One of the things I read in this book, Colonialism and Resistance in Belize, and this all has to do with labor, land, and our rights as human beings, is that when enslavement of African people ended on August 1st, 1838, O. Nigel Boland theorized all that changed was the methodology, but the people in control of land and labor remained in control of land and labor. And just to show you how that spilled over, where you got that 45-hour work week from in Belize, and I'll read it again. I'll read the paragraph before. In British Honduras, the period of apprenticeship was generally free of disturbances and revolts. While little seemed to have changed in terms of labor control, there were now While little seemed to have changed in terms of labor control, there were now power relations between the master and the slave. Matters regarding punishments and other disciplinary actions were not dealt with until after emancipation. A special magistrate was appointed to each colony to oversee relations and enforced that the slaves were working a required 45 hours per week. The end of their apprenticeship period came early since it was found that abuse and ill treatment of enslaved people had gotten worse. Now we're going to say about that, Brother Dean. You know what, Mike?
Sorry.
If I
Yeah.
do that 45-hour work week, me go in there, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I had to pull up. I quickly pulled up our public service regulation, and it speaks to and that's why I said that. Wow, not much has changed. And it speaks. Yeah, section 5 here of 32 hours of duty currently, and this speaks and the sad part about that 45 hours work week, which you reference that used to occur years ago. I'm looking at the current public service regulations, which was amended in 2014. And the pressure get put on the people now we need the most, notwithstanding subrogation to public officers of a department which provides essential services. Or public officers who undertake field work may be required to work up to 45 hours per week or up to 9 hours in one day. So, like I said, here we are, looking back, in the years, and how that might have been, uh, perhaps unfair to a certain degree. And here we are in 2021, and we're still forcing people to work these long hours.
188 years ago. It was in 1833.
Wow, wow.
A hundred, you get a sense, Belizean people? 108. So when people think that enslavement of African people was so long ago, we're very much connected to our past. And it's
Yeah,
inhumane. At the wages that they're paying us, at the wages that they're paying us. I was having a conversation with someone today, and you can verify this, Brother Dean, that most Belizean workers are paid $3.30 per hour. However, agricultural workers are paid $2.75 per hour. Is that right, Brother Dean? You might not, Ian.
yes, that is certainly, and I'll tell you right now what's the, if you can continue, but I'll pull up right now what's the average, or not the average, but uh, maybe I'll call it the mean working wage in the public service. If you give me a break.
I think I asked someone that because that's important to know. When we're talking about wanting to give people a living wage, I didn't know I was going here, but I have my resources. I'm looking for the definition of what a living wage is. I read a quote somewhere that said, I don't know where people got the mindset, and I'm talking about the people who write policies, those in control of banking, who set the global economic system, to think that a human being ought not to be able to own a decent home, have adequate health care, have access to meaningful education, that people should work and live stress free, that all human beings are born with that right. And that's one of the reasons why unions are so important, because a lot of the things that we take for granted as workers in Belize right now is because people sacrificed, agitated, researched, lobbied, were killed sometimes, and we take it for granted. You find it, look for Bernadine.
Yeah, yeah, I was running some numbers here to ascertain. So we still have quite a number of public officers, who are earning that $3.30. But the average public officer is what I'm trying to get at, and the average public officer, earns $30,000 a year.
Uh-huh.
So if we look at that per week, that would be 576. if we just quickly divide that by 40. So they're earning around, the average public officer, they earn around $14 because the bulk of the public
Around
service.
$14 an hour?
Yeah.
About
14.
14. I asked that. I'm so glad you figured that out. $14 an hour is the mean. So that's the average um, government worker. Um, there's I'm reading from one of my books that I had. It talked about wage exploitation. Wage exploitation, the owner exploits the labor of the worker. The owner makes money by paying the worker much less than he gets from the sale of the items the workers produce. The owner takes home this money as profit. So it's for us to understand the economic system and to understand what wage exploitation is and the definition of a living wage rather than the minimum wage would make a real difference in people's lives. Go ahead, Brother Dean.
Yes, yes. I like the fact that you separate those two. Coming back now to the excerpt that you spoke of. I, I just I just want to be clear here with what I heard you read. It's the Civic Textiles. Was that the name of the company where these women work?
Yes, it's the Civic Textile Company Limited. The
Textiles.
Civic Textile Company Limited. I was looking for just so that you could find out how that situation ended. It's already 7:26 though. So this is what it says. It says, for the most part, the recommendations from the Board of Inquiry have been taken lightly by government. After 4 months of dragging their feet, the Labor Department finally computed the amount of money owed to each worker. Yet Civic Textiles requested one additional month to approve the accuracy of the calculations before paying these monies. And I think they eventually left. Yet we must admit that 5 months amidst the frustrations of unemployment and resistance from government officials and civic textiles, the women continued their struggle. Although their pleas for higher wages and improved working conditions were initially thought of as a nuisance by some people in the Labor Department, the women stood their ground to challenge the international perception of Belize as having an unfettered labor force which is adaptable and quick to learn as advertised in our investment codes. We must also emphasize here that the WW has carried out the first women's labor struggle in our history. They have charted a course for other labor movements to follow. They were not afraid to fight for their rights and challenge these people who tried to hurt their cause. Yet why did these women in the year of the 10th anniversary of our independence have to fight so intensely for a right to which is supposed to be guaranteed under our Constitution? And why was the ministry responsible for women's affairs largely absent from the scene, especially when Belize is said to have signed the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women? It is apparent that the garment industry is exploiting women around the world. So why are they allowed to operate in Belize?
Wow. Wow, this in 1991?
Yes, 1991, almost 30 years ago. This is contemporary
Wow.
times.
Wow, but then what I'm saying is that this is just like the other day.
Yeah.
And so I am really surprised that this doesn't form part of the everyday conversation. And it's not so long ago. I mean, the 90s wasn't
30 years ago.
what's the other textile factory? Dickies? Weren't they already in town?
Yes, yes, they were already in town. Yes, they were already in town. But I know because I grew up during that time period and we referred to it as sewing factory. And I knew people who worked there, so I knew it was already there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the
Interesting.
time right now is 7:29. So we'll need to, in about a minute, Brother Dean, to go and look at, I see we have one person, and that's good. So we can continue to have the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Women's Workers Union, I think we need to definitely do so much more research on this union, YaYa, to really understand more about women women's role in unionism. And I know from the public service union standpoint, we have had several women leaders, so I'm really happy and proud about that. But interesting, Women's Workers Union, first time tonight I'm hearing about them. I'm really hoping that Sister Pitts, who has joined us, would be able to perhaps make a comment on the Women's Workers Union, because this is the very first time that I'm hearing of this specific union. And Commission, you mentioned something to the effect that the Commission of Inquiry was taken lightly by the government. Again, nothing new, nothing new. I mean, that like history in Belize, in almost everything we do keeps repeating itself. Immigrants being hired to replace these women. Again, same thing, exact same thing that is occurring currently, even even in the joint unions most recent industrial actions, there was already moves afoot to hire replacement workers rather than uh, as employer to employee, and see how we can resolve these issues in the best interest of the country and in the best interest of everyone that is involved, which includes, of course, the employer and the employee.
You made some great connections from the past with the present, Brother Dean. It's time for the participants to engage us. I don't know if our sister is up to engaging us, but Mustale, Sister Fitz, a unionist for many years, are you up to engaging?
Hello. I wasn't at my desk, and so if you all were shouting for me, I wasn't here. I
read
am only
earlier.
just getting home. I haven't eaten the whole day.
Oof.
That's not
And
good.
so that is what I was doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you eat and talk to us? We want to know what you know about the Women Workers Union strike against the Civic Textile Company Limited in 1991 of April. Do you know anything about them?
Well, I would have liked to go back into the archives, etc., to really give you accurate information. I don't like talking about these things and don't speak accurately. But
Tell
I
us what
do
you remember. We won't hold you to every detail. Just tell us what you remember, since we know you have to eat and we appreciate your accommodating.
well, I have finished eating now. And so I guess I can show my face. All right. Okay.
Good night. Good night, Sister.
Good night, Dean.
It's only three of us, so we could show our faces.
Yeah. Okay. At that time, I was president of the Trade Union Congress.
Okay.
And I felt it was my duty to be with the women. So I was working at the refugee office at the time as the legal protection officer. And the women in their strike used to gather under a tree. And I thought it was my duty to be there with them physically. So I would leave my workplace and I would go. And in my mind, if I was challenged, I thought I had a right to be there. And I would have pushed back on anybody, because if you are president of the Congress, then you have to stand with your people. The women, the persons who were the officers of that Women Workers Union came from the rural area. They were simple women. They came from the villages around. The name Gentle, I think the president was someone by the name of Gentle, the surname. And as I said, it would be good if we could get into the archives and get the newspapers, because the events were highly publicized and the newspapers had in things about them every day nearly. And every day there was some comment. And it all started because of the working conditions, which were very poor. Gate being locked, not being given enough time to eat your lunch, not having enough time to go to the bathroom. The conditions were very bad. And it was, one of the issues was over the peace work. There were different conditions of the work for pay. Peace work as against other type of work.
What is piece work?
Maybe you are there only to do sleeves, the sleeves of something, and so how many sleeves you do, how much you get is dependent on the amount of pieces that you can produce. As I said, I am speaking without going back in time, and so this is loose talk. But the women were very brave. They were courageous, brave women, because they had never been in anything like this before. But they were prepared to stand their ground. And it went on for quite some time. People thought that they would crumble. I don't remember how long they struck, but it went on. Every day they were there until the government decided they would have this an inquiry, of which Mr. Assad Schuman was there as, not as a representative of us. I really can't remember if we had a representative in the discussion, which really should have been, and if it was one of the officers, well, then they certainly should have been accompanied, because they were not women who were used to this type of negotiation. But I really can't remember who all were in that room. I know that I was not. And looking back now, I think I should have been. I should have been. And people were telling us that they didn't think that anything much would come out of it, because I think the trust and faith in the people who are doing the negotiations, people didn't have that trust in them. But yet the negotiations went on. We didn't feel like the Labor Office was really supporting us. We thought that they were making things difficult if they could. We had to do the 50% plus one in order to form the union, and the union was actually formed. And the idea came, we thought at that time that the country really needed a union which would have been called allied workers, that would have taken in the people who worked in the shops, the people who worked at the hotels, in the same way that other Caribbean islands now today have unions that have in that word, allied, which means a group of workers coming from different areas. And we actually drafted a constitution. I know I spent long hours on it, but it came to nothing. I don't remember it going further than the paper that it was on, because the energies had to be with the civic textile workers. And so it was difficult to really be doing the two things at the one time. I remember that a May Day came around, Labor Day, and we went to the civic center in Belize City, and the other unions were there, and the civic center was full. All the bleachers were full. The Prime Minister at the time was Honorable Musa. He was either the Prime Minister or the Minister in charge of Labor. But he gave a speech, and I gave a speech, and we were there in the middle of the Civic Center. And at the end of our speech, a hug was initiated. And looking back now, I smile, because at that time, 30 years ago, you are not that savvy, not to really know what different moves mean, all these moves. The people around us, listening to us, cheering me on, for the union. And then now,
the camera down a little bit so we can see your neck.
oh, all right.
All right, there, that's all right.
Why you want to see my neck? My neck is
Because
nothing nice to see.
I want to look good. You get here, cut you look good. I want to look good. You're the star now, gonna strong.
My neck is nothing nice to see, but if you ask my neck, okay. Yes, where we hugged each other and the crowd cheered, and then the only thought in my mind was that he has his constituents and I have mine too. The two of us have our constituents. And after the negotiation and the inquiry, the people packed up and left. They left because we, the union and the workers, we were insisting that certain conditions should be put in place. And they didn't want to do that. And I think they thought that they would hurt this country, and we were so poor and needed employment. And that is what they hold over your head. You're a poor country, your government wants to find employment for their people. So we will come in, but the conditions will not be what it should be. And we know that you will accept it. But no, we insisted that we wanted what it should be. And they didn't want to give it, and so they packed up and left.
This is what it says. It says, it says on the last day of the Board of Inquiry proceedings, Civic Textiles used the lame excuse of being unable to open the factory due to canceled orders and therefore no work being available for the women. What some people call delayed tactics to destroy the union. Within 2 weeks of this announcement, the company reopened for a week before closing shop again, at which point the government placed a July 15 deadline for the factory's reopening under the condition that it re-employs all the fired workers or its development concession would be revoked. Interviews with government officials reinforced the public feeling of neglect for the welfare of the average person. The WW garnered moral and economic solidarity from national and international agencies, but internal conflict still plagued the union's activities. After a change in its executive body, the WW faced the challenge of negotiating higher wages with Civic Textiles. Acceptable piece rates were negotiated, but no flat rate was agreed upon. The union agreed to a 2-week extension of the July 15 ultimatum, thinking that they could use that time to proceed with negotiations with the company. But before the July 31 deadline was up, the Ministry of Economic Development canceled the company's development concession without prior consultation with the union. Last paragraph. Since then, Michael Saw, TSA, I don't know how you say that. Michael Sai reopened the factory without a development concession, and 4 women were employed at the company, receiving $4 to $5 per day.
Yeah. Yes, at that time, I would say that unions were not strong enough and structured enough to really do a better job, I would say. Because I don't remember being intimately involved in the details. And I think we were placing our confidence in the labor department, because that is what the law says, that if you're having a conflict with workers, well, then the labor. And so I think that was what was happening, because I don't remember being in the details and making my voice heard around any table. I don't remember sitting down, and certainly that should have been the way. That should have been the way that things. I know Mr. Hubert Enriquez was very much a part of it. And I am sorry that he's not on tonight because he could have added more to it. And also Mr. Sutherland, Godwin Sutherland, he was very much a part of it too. And the support that they gave, well, they were officers in the Public Service Union and also officers in the Congress.
Interesting, and yeah, it's a pity Brother Hubert is not here to shed some light on that, but a couple things that stand out from your comments, Sister Pitts. One of the first things you said as president of the Trade Union Congress, you felt the need for you to be there with those workers from the Women's Workers Union. And the reason why that stood out to me is that in our most recent trade dispute with the government of Belize, I recall having a conversation with a sister who represents one of the branches from BNTU. And she was really upset that day when I met her out here at the assembly step because she said, where is the president of the National Trade Union Congress of Belize? And of course, this is not to hit on my brother, but her comment was in line with what you said, that whether or not you belong to one of the affected union as the president of the NTUCB, you need to be at the forefront of this fight. And so I feel, I now understand the conviction that you had and also the conviction that she had in terms of referencing that if anyone should be here, it should also be the president of the Trade Union Congress. In terms of your comments with the Labor Department, YaYa, I quickly was Googling again, trying to find something on women's here, and I found this article, International Women Rights Action Watch. And this was published 1st November 1996. And I just want to quickly read this section under labor and unions, because if only Belizeans can understand that just like our economy, we are stagnant, we're not a grow. It says here, only 11% of the workforce is unionized in one of the country's 11 independent unions. And I'm here thinking of that 120,000, I think I need for us to, I would have to do an analysis to see where we are presently. In 1996, this is saying only 11% of the workforce was unionized. And it was saying again, with the exception of teachers, as well as agricultural and public sectors, unions are weak and strikes are uncommon. And now we know that the agriculture section is pretty much out. It is pretty much just the public sector and the teachers. And of course, we still have a small agricultural section with the brothers up in the north. But check this out. In many cases, workers' attempts to form trade unions are obstructed by employers. And that brings to mind the tourism sector, which accounts for a large percentage of our GDP, but yet our workers are limited to simply earning, as I would say, taking out the garbage and cleaning the feces and making up the beds. In a 1997 report, the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions, ICFTU, singled out the banana industry as having the worst record of workers' rights violation. YaYa, where are we today? Where are we today?
Dean, this country has signed the Migrant Convention, and I don't know if anybody, including people in the unions, including myself, I have it in my filing cabinet. I think I have it filed in a special folder, and I have promised myself that I would read it, but we signed it. And just today, I was in a meeting where this whole thing about workers came up, because this country has agreements where we bring in workers. And I was saying in the meeting that in order to know what's going on, in order to bring about change, of course, we know to bring about change, you have to have knowledge, information. Yeah. And the starting point would be going to the government or getting from the government what arrangements is it that they have, because they do have an arrangement. And in the meeting, it was being said that once someone come in on the basis of that agreement for the first year, it is like opening the way for that person to stay. And it shouldn't be like that, because we know that in the Caribbean, they have these agreements with, like in Canada, and the men would go. And I don't know, well, you might know that we are not an island, and that seems to play a very big role in what happens in your country. They would get on the plane and they fly to Canada, to pick whatever they pick. And when the time is finished, they come home. But here in Belize, it is like a step towards getting into our country. And there doesn't seem to be anyone who is checking and really putting a close eye on it. But what should concern us even more is the fact that their passports are held for months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. And during that time, in order to remain in the country, they have to pay fees, which have now gone up from $50, I understand, to $200. And so the employer pays it, and your debt is increasing. And so they hold a passport. Now the passport is held, I understand, because the permit has expired and they are supposed to be getting an extension to the permit. And so they have a legitimate reason to tell you, I'm holding the passport. But also the money that is owed to them. I think their fear is that if you have the passport, you might leave. And so what it boils down to, in my opinion, with the limited knowledge, and information that I have, because I know that I don't have all information, it is trafficking that is going on, human trafficking. And it's a big problem. And my lady called me from the Banana Belt, and she was so glad to be speaking to someone. She said that for years, people have been going to her, and she's like a bush lawyer in the area, no? They go to her and they lodge their complaints. But she said she didn't have anybody to go to, because when she goes to the labor office, she feels that it is a waste of time. They firmly believe that officers are in league with the employers and taking bribes and kickback. And I called the labor office and spoke to someone who I know, and she was explaining that a part of the problem is with the BGA, who I think is the Banana Growers Association, who not proper timing of how the permits are handled. But what I heard makes me know that the whole thing needs looking into. It needs looking into. And the unions, I think the unions have an obligation to do so. The Human Rights Commission has an obligation to do so, because it is totally wrong, unfair, unjust. It is trafficking. And I don't know if the US places that on its this description of trafficking. I might get the idea that they usually are looking at girls and women and the sexual thing, but this is outright trafficking. You're holding someone's passport against their will, and you are not explaining to them what they need to do in order to get their papers. And so that's a big task for the unions and the commission.
Yes, I think now that you mentioned that, that's It's also a wonderful opportunity for the Southern Workers Union.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
To
Yeah.
grow it.
Somebody
Also,
should be talking to them.
exactly. If I could, you mentioned about the BG and look at this. I just want to read the last two sentences. Yeah, it said, according to the report, employers in the banana industry, particularly in the Stan Creek area, represented by the Banana Growers Association, have blocked workers' attempts to form unions since the 1980s. Workers who are already members of unions, and we know there is none today in terms of the banana workers, or who try to join them, face harassment from the police. I don't know if you could, if that used to be the case. I don't know if in this day and age there is perhaps that, because I don't know if there were
I
accurate.
wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't
Yeah,
doubt it.
yeah.
Because apparently the persons in authority are easily sucked into the the turning of heads or the taking of money, easily. It seems. Now, there was a case. I think the employer was a Zabani. They have a number of farms, and so I don't know which one, but they tried to form a union and they fired the persons who were the leaders. But of course, I don't think that any employer is that stupid, to outright say, I'm firing you because you want to form a union. They will do it subtly, they will come up with reasons or whatever. But nevertheless, Justice Moore, presently she's Justice Moore, Antoinette Moore, took that case to court and they won. The court recognized that it was because these men were trying to organize a union that they were fired. And they ordered compensation. But I don't know if they ever got it. Because, the courts can always order compensation, but then you would have to take out another case when the person don't pay what they should pay. And I don't know how that thing ended, but I know she won, and that's a case that I think that unionists should have in their files and records and know what the judge said, the judgment, because it's a guide, for what happens when you are trying to form a union.
Yes. There is it's like you're speaking, and like you're speaking directly from this report, because again, the final letter says human rights monitors accuse employers of blocking union organizers by firing key union sympathizers. And it was, of course, still speaking of the BGA, usually on grounds ostensibly unrelated to union activities. Although a worker may file a complaint with the Labor Department for redress, it is virtually impossible to prove that the termination was due to union activity. The exact same thing you're saying, or that you just said, in terms of the unreliability of the Labor Department. And that exists today. I got a call from a brother out in Central Farm. He was dismissed as part of this of course, victimization that occurs government after government in the public service. And he said he went to the Labor Department and he spoke to a particular labor officer. And the labor officer looked at him and told him, I can't help you because your complaint is against my employer. And I'm like, but that's not a job by the labor officer, brother. I was really upset. I said, please give me the brother name. And I hate to say this, but the brother is also one of my union member and a past executive of the union, to look at one public officer being unfairly terminated and say to him, I can't assist you because your complaint is against the government of Belize, who happens to be my employer. Your job, my brother, as a labor officer, to advise and show people where their rights are being violated. So I was really upset about that. Of course, I called the office and registered the complaint. That, I mean, where else is people supposed to go if they think they're being wronged. And my final comment on this injustice, YaYa, I'm trying to find it here, but there are hundreds of workers, and I think we might have already passed the thousand mark, where this unjust dismissal has taken place. And one of the saddest things happening as we speak right now is that most of these people were in this service in continuous employment over the last 10 to 12 years. And the accountant general is saying to all these people that they are not deserving of a single penny in gratuity, despite an amendment to the Labor Act, which took place, I believe, in I'm trying to find it here exactly what was the what was it that was said. But this is really sad because
but why what's the reason that the accountant general gave?
Right.
Did they get a reason?
Yes, and that what I wanted to share with you, Sister Pitts, is the actual wording coming out of the Solicitor General's office, which I certainly, not again being one bush liar myself.
That is why I am eagerly waiting to hear the reason, because what's the reason? Because that amendment was made specifically to deal with the open vote workers who are not getting anything. And I know I have personally had the incident of being in charge of an office and being not outrightly pressured, but I knew that in that office, they wanted someone to be removed. And of course, coming from the union, I could never entertain any injustice to any worker. Now, if there is reason, well, then I will. And so eventually, I had reason. I had reason. But I looked at that amendment because if that worker was going to be terminated, I wanted him to get what he should get.
Yeah.
And so if it meant keeping him on maybe a few months or what, so that he could complete the 10 years. So I haven't checked with the worker years later, but I might think he got what he should have gotten, or I hope he got it. I mean, if he didn't get it, I think he would have been coming to me.
It's 2 minutes after 8 right now.
Yeah. Just give me 1 minute. Make mention of this, Sister Pitts.
But the unions, they have to look into that. As to the reason why, and if necessary, in a court case.
No, man.
Because I know the law was amended specifically, so how now you are here that they can't get it?
This is the legal explanation that was given to me, that open vote workers were being disenfranchised of a gratuity and a pension despite being in this system for donkey years. The amendment took place to ensure that just like Dean Flowers, who permanently established, if YaYa Marin works for 10 years, she also qualifies for gratuity. If she goes beyond 15, she also qualifies for pension. But look at this excuse coming out of the Solicitor General office. The above mentioned memo at 5.6 reads, the Pensions Act and the Pensions Regulation also provides for other instances where an officer would be granted a gratuity, even where the officer has not satisfied the required number of years, or a pension or gratuity, which would equally apply to an open vote worker. However, these additional provisions that allows for the grant of a gratuity are only applicable on retirement or resignation and would not be granted on termination. You terminated these people without just cause.
But then, Dean, one should look to the amendment. What you read is the amendment. My memory is that it was a simple thing. And so it is a matter of getting the laws, getting all the relevant laws and looking at them, you know, because maybe you are looking at a piece here and there is another piece somewhere. So the first thing is to get the laws.
Yeah. So what we've done, we've sent this to two of our, whom I would classify as our internal, who gives us legal opinions and lawyers internally. But I have made it clear to the IRO that while we await their opinion, we need to reach out to our independent, to an independent legal counsel that has been recommended to take up this. And not only these cases, I mean, we have, like I said, hundreds of people who just work 13 years, most of them 12 years for this government, and this government decides to then go home and don't have nothing for them. Unfair.
And the thing is, Dean, this is an issue which is bigger than just this person, you know, because most of these people who are on open vote get minimum wages. Not minimum, but are the people who get the smaller wages in this country, and they make up the majority.
Majority, yeah.
So this is something that is bigger that people should know about. You see, people don't know these things. You know, people don't know. And this is the education and the PR and the communication and putting out your releases and so on. You know, most organizations are not that structured strongly enough to do that, but that is what we should be aiming at. That the people should know. People should know about these things.
It's 6 minutes after 8.
All right, okay.
You all just taught us about it. So always remember that that is what the intention of this Thursday night reasoning about workers' rights is about. It's a documented space where people can come back whenever they need to listen and be guided. And thank you so much, Mr. Cynthia Pitts. Thank you. So this is just, I love it when the show just organically end up rich like tonight's show. Thank you so much for your contribution, Musli. Thank you so much, co-host Dean Flowers. We have to lock off. No, thanks, Trish. I know it's supposed to be an hour and still there. Was there anything you wanted to say quickly before we leave, Dean? Your mic is...
Right.
I just quickly, well, as usual, I'm very grateful for the space here. Yeah, I'm very grateful to be a part of this. And I want to thank Ms. Pitts. I think that, I mean, you know, I'm just happy that we could hear from her experiences, her expertise. And even though tonight she started off by saying she would have liked to go to the archives, she talked to it. Man, the woman made a writing at the kitchen. So I never had to go into the archives, you know. So I'm very grateful again for your contribution tonight, Sister Pitts. Thanks for your comments on this pressing issue. This will be one big news item in the coming weeks, because we will not, as a union, watch laborers, watch workers get abused in this fashion without putting up a fight.
Yeah.
Respect. Next Thursday, we have our guest book. It will be Unionist Nelson Young. So next week, Thursday, we're hot. Every Thursday. Okay. Thanks again for those who tuned in. We're on YouTube, and you could watch us at your convenience. Thanks again, Sister Pitts. Thanks again.
It was my pleasure. And even though I'm supposed to be retired, I always say that if you have it in your brain, you should share it. And so I'm always willing to help out if it's a matter of talking about it and giving advice, guidance, etc.
Thanks, Mr.
Because once a unionist, it seems to stay in your blood. You really can't.
I don't know, because that labor officer is supposed to be one executive in the union. You say how it going on.
Well, affair. You see, you can't be afraid. I mean, if you are a unionist, a true unionist, You have to be brave. You can't fearful.
Respect. Thanks again, Sister Trisha. Thanks, Brother Dean. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, sisters.
Good night. Bye.